Hey, welcome back to KP Unpacked. My name is Jeff Eccles. I am the head of our Mastermind program here at KP Reddy Co. I also host an awful lot of podcasts and videos, many of which include our CEO and founder, KP Reddy. This is KP Unpacked. Glad you're here. Hi, KP.
Hey, how's it going?
It is going well. I sometimes I stumble over that introduction because we have so many versions, so many different people that we're bringing in. We're expanding the reach and expanding the format of this podcast. So it is still at its heart. It's you and I unpacking your LinkedIn posts, but there's a lot of other offerings out there as well. So always glad when we get to sit down and get together and unpack. Have a little bit of fun unpacking some of your LinkedIn posts here.
Well, if LinkedIn can't be fun, like, why do we do it?
Isn't that the official company tagline of LinkedIn?
Yeah. If you can't have fun on LinkedIn, what are you gonna do? Do TikTok? Like what?
Yeah, I think Bill Gates came up with that. If you can't have fun on LinkedIn or saving the world, I don't know. For those of you that are new around here, welcome. KP and I get together every week and we take one of his LinkedIn posts, like I said, and we literally go through it. And I get to ask, hey, KP, what were you thinking when you posted that on LinkedIn? What was the inspiration for that? So if you're not following KP Reddy on LinkedIn, you should be. You can't connect with him. He has maxed out his connections there on LinkedIn, but you can follow him. Just look up KP, the letter K, the letter P, Reddy, Reddy, and you'll find him there. He posts 2 or 3 times a week, or not 2 or 3 times a week, 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes 2 or 3 times an hour. I don't know. I've never told you this, KP, but I had to turn off my notifications on LinkedIn because you started posting so often that I just hear like this continual ding on my computer. It's just like KP, KP, KP. So I've turned those notifications off. But if you're following KP 2 or 3 times a day, generally, he posts something. It's all his insights. We were talking before we hit record. He's been traveling a lot. He's been speaking a lot. We've got advisory clients all over the country. We've got a research team that's deep into new research. We just launched the Integrated Owners Forum, which I'm sure we'll touch on briefly here as we talk. So a lot of what KP talks about or writes about on LinkedIn are the insights he gains, the conversations that he's having. They're the experiences of a CEO and founder flying around the country and working with the leaders of innovation across AEC. So you should follow him there. But you're home today.
Yeah, I'm home. You know, it's interesting. People always ask, like, how do you write to him? Like, how do you do all this stuff? I'm like, I spend so much time with other people. I don't know that all of my thoughts are original thought. A lot of it is just really the engagement I have with people and the conversations we have. And honestly, some of it's like the stuff they say to me on the side, like, hey, I would never tell my boss this, but, and CEOs come to me and say, hey, I would never tell my employees, but, and so I'm able to like kind of synthesize all that and push it back out there. And I think, lately, not that I really look at the metrics of LinkedIn. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking into an abyss, but lately I've had posts where I've had more comments than I've had reactions, which tells me when I'm saying something, and like I said, none of all my stuff is original thought. It's highly like curated content in many ways. I mean, God forbid, like if I sat in a room by myself and all I did was share you my original thoughts, it'd probably get flagged by LinkedIn. But these are like, it's a curation and synthesizing other people's ideas and thoughts, right? So, but if you want the thoughts where I'm sitting by myself, catch me on Reddit. However, it's very interesting. And I think the reason I get more comments than reactions is because I've picked up something through all these conversations that resonates with a lot more people than I thought.
Sure. Yeah. And
Or
just to
doesn't
be clear,
or doesn't resonate, right? They're pissed off at me.
right. Well, I mean, but when it comes to engagement, that's also effective. Just to be clear, if you are an employee and you tell KP, hey, I would never tell my boss this. He's not going to call you out on LinkedIn,
No, I
right?
will not.
He's
I've
not
never
going to call you out and tag you, right? He anonymizes the content there. He anonymizes the comment. So you're safe. It's a safe place
yeah,
when you talk
safe
to
place.
KP
Safe
about
place.
that. Yeah, and to your point about the comments versus reactions, et cetera. I mean, that's for those that haven't figured this out yet. I mean, we've been recording this podcast for over a year now, or this version of the podcast for over a year. Um, we go through this every week, right? And say, okay, well, what has been interesting to people? What are they commenting on? What are they sharing, et cetera? So we do try to unpack the posts that are really resonating with the AEC world, right?
Yeah.
It is the ones that they are the ones that people are talking about, and today's is no different. Um, we selected this one because it's a mix. It's got a lot of comments. It also has a number of shares, and so there's a lot going on with it. Also, because you talk about the future and it's a generational discussion, if you will. And as I read it, people will hear where you're coming from on it. As a dad of two Gen Zs, I'm also a dad of two Gen Zs. So this will get interesting because you and I both have a lot of experience in the realm of these younger people, and also the way that they show up and the way that others think about
Mm.
think maybe generationally in the workplace. So I think this is going to be a fun one to unpack. We may
I
ruffle some feathers,
Yeah,
and
I
that's
also
okay.
think, Jeff, it's important to note too, like you run our emerging innovation leaders group, which
Right,
is just a few, mostly Gen Zs, right?
right.
Mostly Gen
Yeah,
Zs. So, so I don't, I think, we're hanging out with the Gen Zs enough that it's not just our opinion. It's not just
right.
like, oh, we're making this stuff up. These are conversations we're having.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good point. I mentioned in the opening, as I always do, that I head up our mastermind program here at KP Reddy Co. And we have mastermind groups for innovation leaders, so directors of innovation, chief innovation officers, folks like that, construction technology leaders, same sort, but maybe focus more on how are they implementing the technology to the boots on the ground. And then we also have our early and mid career professionals, and I always that to be honest, that's one of my favorite groups
Mhm.
because most of the people that are participating in that group share a commonality in their stories to you and I, right?
Yeah.
You're educated and worked as a civil engineer. I am educated and worked as an architect. Neither one of us are doing that now. We've taken these non-traditional routes, if you will. And many of the folks, if not all of them, in our early and mid-career group are doing the exact same thing. And some of them say, hey, I want to be that innovation leader. I want to
Mhm.
be that construction tech leader or whatever's next. So um, reach out if you want to. If you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, if you want to know more, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let's just say it that way, or go to our website and click on Mastermind groups, and you can learn more about the groups. And the one, I guess that will be most specifically related to what we talk about today is the early and mid career AEC professionals group. That's a good. I'm glad you brought that up. So you posted about Gen Z, and your post goes like this. I'm going to read the first part of it, and then we'll unpack the observations as we go because this one is a little bit longer than many of them that you do post. So it goes like this. The future is Gen Z. I post about AI and robotics. However, it doesn't mean that I don't understand that humans are the biggest part of the AEC industry. Yesterday, I was in a roundtable talking about the construction workforce of the future. The few millennials in the room sighed with relief that that the discussion moved to how challenging the Gen Zs are and not focused on them, the millennials.
Right.
So they got a little bit of relief, right?
Yeah.
Um, KP goes on to say, I guess they are out of the crosshairs now from us Gen X, which is KP and I, and those boomers, which don't call us boomers. We're not boomers. KP says, I happen to be the dad of 2 Gen Zs, as am I. And through our Emerging Innovation Leader program, which we talked about a minute ago, I meet many more. As a rule, every generation thinks the next generation is lazy and terrible. That's consistent. However, I think good and bad is not the right rubric. Every generation is just different than the last. Every generation has a mixed bag of levels of work ethic, etc. i.e., every generation has the same percentage of lazy, no good doers as the last. What makes a generation different is their life experiences that shape them. So here are a few observations, and we'll unpack those observations as we go. There are 4. If you find this post over on LinkedIn, again, follow KP, the letter K, the letter P, Reddy, Reddy. So we'll unpack the 4 observations that you have here. You ready to jump into that, or you want to preface anything?
Okay. No, I think let's roll.
All right. Your first observation is a quote. All of these are quotes. These are things that people say about Gen Z. I feel like a Gen X, a Gen Z, and a Boomer walk into a bar. It seems like this is the setup.
And the Gen X's pick up the tab.
I think that's right. No, I'm not going to go there on Boomers. Never mind. Okay, the first observation before I get in trouble. They don't want to pay their dues. All right. Why is that important? When does this come up? Why does it come up? What do you think about they don't want to pay their dues?
Yeah, so I think, our industry is such an apprentice industry, right? Like if you're on the sub and trade side, you are literally called an apprentice, and you go through the stages. And if you're an architect, you go through as an intern architect, right? Or you're an EIT or an FE, I guess what they call it right now, right? Like
it's evolving. Yeah.
It's evolving, right? So these are all like highly apprentice oriented businesses. So for like the old guy managers or gal managers, there's this idea that like you got to pay your dues, right? You got to be an apprentice or an intern. And if you're maybe an architect, you got to draw door details, like just grind on stuff, right? And that somehow like that's being productive. And, the way I look at some of that stuff is that just because that was your pay your dues moment doesn't mean it applies to the next generation. Yep. And if we're going to sit there and like make them waste their time and be highly uninspired by the work they do, because that's the way we did it.
Right.
There's plenty of ways to get people engaged, to quote unquote pay their dues and learn the things. And I think that's one of those big misnomers, is that just because someone doesn't want to do the work you did 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
That's their method of grinding it and paying their dues or whatnot, that it's wrong, right?
Yep.
That it's wrong. And I think that's one of those things where, all the different things, whether it's having this attitude towards your boss, this reverence, like the chief engineer or the chief architect, like, or the partner, like this reverence that maybe they just don't care about. And I think one of the things, we look at, I'm just looking at the post, like, why do we want them to, how far back are we going to go?
Yeah.
Right. Oh no, here's some slide rules.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's some vellum. Yeah.
Here's a calculator. Like, how far back do we want to take them? And I think one of the things I've seen where this is becoming more and more effective, I was talking to our friend, Dr. Sam Chandon.
Yeah. Love Sam.
About his class, because I'll pop into his class and teach every, once a month or every couple of months. And he was telling me, like, from the academic world, when you were in college, an open book test was hard.
Mm-hmm.
because that meant you actually, it wasn't about recall of information. You actually had to know how to apply it. So he was telling me his class, which is one of his data classes, the final project used to be like framework out a software product
Mm.
to execute on some data process. And he's like, so that was about all they could fit in. He's like, now with AI though, I'm making them actually build it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So it doesn't mean you can't be performance oriented and all that. But I think this idea of, pay your dues doing what I did when I was your age is not the right method. There's other ways to do
Yep.
it. And I think
Yep.
what I think the Gen Zs look at that like, why am I doing this? Like, what? This is not
Mm-hmm.
productive, right? This is
Yeah.
not productive.
Yeah. Yeah. We're jumping in right on top of one of my hot button issues. Um, whether I look at it from the academic standpoint, because I teach in the undergrad and the graduate level, or I look at it from the profession side. And then again, for those of you that don't know, my background is architecture. KP's background is engineering. So I've got a lot to say about the profession of architecture and that idea, right? Um, because I had to. They have to pay their dues because I had to pay my dues. Um, First of all, one of the things I would say is I truly believe that one of the most dangerous statements that we have in our society is because this is the way we've always done it,
Mhm.
right? That doesn't align in any way with innovation, by the way.
Right.
So this is the way we've always done it is very, very dangerous. This protection of status quo is dangerous. It's not moving us forward. And if you insist in they have to pay their dues because I paid my dues, that's toxic and that's abusive,
Mhm.
right? You were in a toxic environment. You were in an abusive environment. So why do you pass that down to the next
Right.
generation, the millennials, the Z's,
Mhm.
and so on? Um, just because, and it is absolutely still there. Oh well, they need to be pulling all nighters. No, they don't need to be pulling all nighters,
Yeah.
right? They need to be working smart. They need to be learning tools. They need to be developing critical thinking and all these things that are valuable going forward.
Right.
And they need to develop a healthy lifestyle.
Mhm.
We need in a way a better generation
Yeah.
than we were when we were coming up. And to your point, I mean, I think I've told this story as we've recorded before. I did my internship while many of my classmates, and this will date me obviously, but while many of my classmates were using AutoCAD when
Mhm.
we did our internships, it was probably like AutoCAD 4 or something back then. I found a job at a firm here in Indianapolis where I live, where there were two architecture partners and there was a interior design partner. All three of them went to IIT in Chicago, so Illinois Institute of Technology, which they've just rebranded, I think. I think it's Illinois Tech now, maybe something like that. The two architecture partners had Mies van der Rohe as
Mhm.
a professor, literally Mies van der Rohe,
Mhm.
right? And so when I learned that, I'm like, okay, I knew these guys were old, but they must be like 150 years old, right?
Right.
They had Mies van der Rohe as a professor. I know that I was hired because I walked in the door understanding how to turn their one computer on.
Mhm.
Right? They didn't know. They
Right.
were using pencils. In some cases, we worked on projects where we had original drawings on linen. It was ink on linen.
Mhm.
Do we want to do that today? Because if we kept the same thinking, we'd still be using ink on linen or papyrus or something. I
Yeah.
don't know, right? Why would we do that? We don't. We talk about innovation here all the time. We need to innovate in our thinking in terms of how our students should learn, how our interns or whatever their titles are, how they should be trained, and what their abilities are. And
Right.
it's going to be different. They're going to be more advanced in
Right.
some areas than we are, which I think is important for us to accept.
Right. And I think it's like, what are the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
Like, am I supposed to be hand calculating everything? Like, like how far
Right.
back do you want to go on this stuff?
Yeah.
So I think there's a weird generation psychological thing that goes on. I
Hmm.
think Gen Z is very smart and they want to move very fast.
Right.
And when their boss or leadership is in their 40s or 50s, they are at a point in their career where they're just like cool, calm, it's all dialed in. They're not moving fast. They're not trying to move
Hmm.
fast.
Yep.
And so this young kid shows up and they want to move, they want to be a vice president in 5 years. So if I had someone that was 22 years old show up to my desk and say, "Hey, I love working here. I want to be a vice president in 25 years." My reaction was like, not 20, why not 24 years? Why not by the time you're 24? Why are
Hmm.
you going to wait till you're 25? Like,
Yep.
and, how do we do this? Right. And then let them run. Right. And I think instead there's this weird, because I'm still running pretty fast, even though I'm older. But a lot of folks at these firms are very comfortable. They're just like very comfortable. And so these young folks that want to move very quickly and execute a lot more, they hold them back. And it's because they're afraid. They're
Right.
afraid, right? They're afraid. They don't know that they know kind of how to manage these people.
Right.
So I think when you look at that, right, that there's a foundational issue where there's just a conflict with the older generation and the Gen Zs. And they don't want to hear about how they can, doing it smarter. Some of the old folks think like, oh, you're just trying to shortcut. You're doing shortcuts.
Right.
You got to learn the
Yep.
foundation. And
Yep.
so I think that's just one of those things where I disagree with this idea that that they don't want to pay their dues. I just think the leadership's not raising the bar high enough, um, and instead they're just putting in those old ideas, right? Those old patterns of what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's an aspect too, right? There's always the realities of the profession. There are fundamentals, sure, right? I mean, we've got to learn to walk. There are things that have to be done.
Hmm.
However, things are changing so quickly, and I understand, where some people, well, probably a lot of people, that say that they need to pay their dues, they feel threatened,
Yeah.
right? It comes from a place of fear. I get that, but we've got to get over that. Right?
Hmm.
We've got to get over it and approach that in a different way. It's 2025.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad did this thing like, you can't learn how to drive unless you know how to drive a stick shift.
Hmm.
Are we doing that to kids today?
I think I might.
I mean, it's like, yeah, maybe. Like, what? You're gonna rent a car. You're gonna be in a situation where, I mean, how many stick shifts are out there? It's
Yeah.
mostly like sports car. Like, it's by design. In fact, someone was telling me like, the best if you get a stick shift, it's like the ultimate theft deterrent.
Yeah. I know who told you that, because that person is building that car, right? Or restoring that car.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, we had that same
Um,
conversation.
but you know what I mean? So I think anyway, I think this idea of pay your dues, we all pay our dues every day, right?
Right. Right.
That's not the thing. Paying your dues is learning, but I think just trying to get people to go learn on a stick shift, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a friend. She's retired now. She's a longtime architect. I think she's 73 years old this year, maybe. And we've talked before about mentorship, and I love her approach to it. Imagine her mentoring a Gen Z today, right? At 73 years old. She says, I always approached mentorship as a two-way street, in that I'm going to teach whoever it is, my mentee, whoever it is that I'm mentoring,
Mhm,
and I expect them to teach me. And I
mhm,
I think that's a fantastic approach, right? It's, what is a Gen Z that's working with me? What are they going to be able to teach me?
yeah, yeah.
A
I
lot,
think
frankly.
I agree, but I think that that two-way street, if leadership is not creating an environment where that Gen Z can turn around when they're asked to do some mundane pay your dues task, where they can't say, "Hey, why? Like,
Hmm.
why am I doing it this way? I can have AI do it this way, this other way,
Yeah,
right? And I can have it done in
yeah.
15 minutes versus the
Mhm.
8 hours." And so one of the things, so this all came from a conversation. I had all these CEOs of big construction companies with me, and I was leading this roundtable. And I was like, you know what that means to you as a leader? You better make more time to actually spend time with these Gen Zs,
Hmm.
because you don't get to say, like, they don't come by your office and you say, hey, go do this task, knowing that it's going to take them 2 weeks and you don't have to deal with them again for 2 weeks.
Yep. Right.
Instead, they're going to go away and do a task, and they'll be back in 2 hours saying, hey, what's next?
Hmm.
Right. So that's like one of those things, like, you better make more time for these Gen Zs, because they're moving quick and they're going to execute work faster. You don't just get to say, like, go spend the next month drawing these details. I'll see you
Yeah.
next month. You actually have to
Hmm.
engage with them daily, if not hourly. If they're
Yep.
on Slack or Teams with you, it's hourly.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So maybe they don't want to pay their dues. Maybe they don't need to pay their dues.
Mhm.
The second observation that you included here in the LinkedIn post was they don't understand relationships. Is that true?
No, they absolutely do. I think the one thing I think that they do understand about relationships is they have um, plenty of relationships, but relationships doesn't mean, oh, we have to, like, go play golf and go do happy hour and talk about our kids, right? That's not necessarily what's important. And that, this idea, like, you can't have a relationship without being face to face, it's not true.
Right.
It's not true, right? And so I
Yep.
think that's one of those old idea in terms of constructs, because I see it. I'm sure you see it with. I mean, my boys are very active with their friend group. They're have very deep relationships, and in fact, like, I think, like, some of these text based relationships, you cut through the BS. You actually learn about people in an accelerated way, more so than, God, I forgot I had a call yesterday with a founder. And when I do these founder calls, it's an interesting dynamic, because I do publish and all that. They show up to a call with me very well equipped to know what I'm about.
Hmm.
They already know me, right? I know nothing about them. So generally, I'm like, I start off the call with this simple thing. I'm like, hey, how can I help you? Because I assume they know everything about me,
Right.
right? Which, if they're a founder, they probably should have done their homework and all those things, right? So I'm like, so how can I help you? And I had a reaction yesterday from a founder who's like, wow, just jumping right into it. Thought we could share our backgrounds and all. And I'm like, you already know my background.
Right.
I'm
That's
here
why
as a
we're on the call.
resource.
Right.
I'm here as a resource. Like, you have 20 minutes, dude. Like, do you want to, like, have this banter to get to know each other, or do we want to get something done? And I think sometimes, especially, our industry, where it's like, it's the relationship business. Like, what does that even mean? Right. First of all, but the idea that relationships can only be built, uh, I think I do value in person, right? Our mastermind groups, we meet twice a month via Zoom and once a quarter in person. We see the value of that, but we know that our in person is much more about feelings and getting, it's about having the beer together and all that stuff. But we don't, if we were doing it all in person, like, is that really that valuable, or is that efficient? So I think this idea that they don't value relationships is wrong. I think it's the method in which they build relationships. Back to our first point, everything is faster,
Hmm.
and people get very uncomfortable when things are moving faster than what they're accustomed to.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's and we can attribute this to Gen Z certainly, but it's nothing new. Right? I've been doing this talk called "Commodity Is as Commodity Does" since I don't know, like 2016 or something like that, and I structure all my talks in series of stories. So here's a story, and here's a story, and here's a story. And one of the stories in Commodity Is as Commodity Does is about relationships. And the
Mhm,
idea it's that version of the talk is really about business development.
mhm,
And the it's a cautionary tale about the fact that relying too heavily on relationships for business development. Oh, we've been doing the work for that university for 25 years, or whatever it is that the BD people are saying, that is very, very dangerous, right? That's what's going to get you caught out. So um to your point, relationships, and I guess, again, this is the way we've always done it, right? Relationships are different now. We have to understand that we have an entire generation of young people that spent a couple of years not going to school,
Yeah.
right? Wherever they were, high school, college, middle school, wherever they were. The world is very, very different from them, and they didn't stop relating to people.
Yeah. But you know what is? I think part of it too is the filter, right? In some of these in-person, slow, moving slow.
Mhm.
I mean, sorry, people are full of shit.